Hello. Okay, so this is our group meeting for, I don't know which group we are, but this is our parent interview meeting. So we kind of tried to put it together too late, and a lot of people weren't able to come. Um, Let me see which people. So Kaya tried really hard to come, but she had technical difficulties, so that's why she wasn't able to make it. Vicky McKay and Andy Angman weren't able to come, but they send their material in so I could talk about it. And we never heard anything back from Leanne. So that's kind of where we are right now. And so I wanted to turn in a meeting anyway because that's part of our assignment. So I thought I would just gather their stuff and talk about it right here. So we are supposed to spend 5 to 10 minutes going over our interviews. So I will start with my interview. I interviewed my aunt, and she has a son with ADHD, and I changed the names on there because I didn't want, for privacy reasons, because that was part of our assignment that was mentioned, we should change names for privacy or something. So she said her son Joe, there wasn't much of a difference in his development compared to her other children. They didn't see a difference until he was older, and he was really outgoing when he was young, and he talked to everyone. That's pretty normal for a young kid, but then once he got older, he was still doing that and hugging everyone and kissing everyone, and that's when they realized there might be a problem. He would start conversations with complete strangers, and which is a little bit scary for a kid. So she said some of her kids took a long time to potty train, and one of her kids spoke later. Joe took a long time to potty train because he would get really wrapped up in what he was doing and forget to use the restroom, and he still wets the bed sometimes. Every one of her children was ahead except for one of them because she didn't talk until she was 4, but they think that was because she had lots of people to talk for. Joe is part of a special program at school that provides some things for his ADHD. He gets to take tests orally in a separate location from other kids. He also doesn't have to do the last 5 questions on some of his homework and tests. And so that helps him to have some support at school. And his ADHD has been a challenge. They couldn't find out what was wrong for a while. They took him to a neurologist. He had some abnormal brain function, but nothing that caused really serious side effects. So he was doing okay in school, and then they tried medication, and he has been doing better. But obviously, that is still a challenge. So my aunt said that she had one little boy in her Cub Scout troop that had autism, and when he would come in, he would jump on tables and chairs and yell a lot. And then in the next few months, he went from yelling and talking loudly and jumping on things to being able to sit for a few minutes at a time a few months later. So that was a big change. And there was another boy that has ADHD but was abused in daycare that she knew, and he was really nervous about doing scouting requirements, so he needed someone to like sit down and walk him through the process. And that was basically my interview. So we had a few questions that we need to answer, and they were what is your sense of normal? What does normal mean? And for me, I think everyone has their own normal. It's like different for everyone, but if you can recognize that you or maybe your child or someone that you work with is unhappy, then there's something that can be done because everybody's normal is different, and it's not something, there's like kind of a baseline that you can compare to other people, but you shouldn't be comparing everything about yourself to other people because their normal is different than yours. I hope that makes sense. Um, did you find that parents were often the last to know if there was a delay or problem with their child? Um, I think so. No, that's not true. I think the parents were the first to know. They spend the most time with the child. But maybe in a public situation, it would be pretty obvious that he was a little bit different than the rest of the kids. So maybe the parents were the last to know, but probably not. How did they come to that awareness? Well, he was a little bit different and he had trouble doing things at home. Did you get a sense of whether or not parents were receptive to receiving services? Yes, they were receptive to receiving services. And it didn't seem like the parents were uncomfortable with the special needs of the child. And they were still working on the problem, so maybe not a resolution, but an acceptance. He needs help, and they're there to help him, so they're going to do that. Okay, so now I'm going to go over, let's see, this is Andy Angman's interview, and I'm going to go over hers. Vicky sent me her stuff too, but for some reason it didn't come through. So that one I don't have, which is unfortunate. I think the filter on the BYUI email picked it out for being buggy or something and wouldn't let it go through. At least that's what it looked like on my email. So I don't have hers, but I have Kaya. I have Kaya Kids and Andy Angman's. So I'm gonna go over Ann's, or maybe she goes by Andy. I don't know. Okay, so share some of the points of the interview. She talked to her sister, and her sister has 4 kids. Their ages are 9, 7, and 3, and 10 months. She said that her kids were mostly developing around the same time, but the nephew, I don't know which one that is. Oh, the baby boy. He's been developing a little bit slower and crawling and sitting. Oh, he's slower at learning to crawl and sit, but he does both now at 10 months, so that's good. They talked about how, because he has 3 sisters that help him a lot, that could be part of it. Part of the reason why he was slower to do things on his own. So she said, I'm just going to read this. So she said her sense of normal is, I think to me, normal is different for everyone. What may be normal to some may not be normal to others. Because normal is different for everyone, I think my sense of normal would be just seeing if the parent is comfortable in the development of the child is based off my knowledge of child development. I can see the child seems normal to me or not. It's a fine line because everyone is different, but that is why we have research and doctors and things to help us know what the average normal is. I think that's a good answer, and I agree. We have like a baseline of where we think we should be based on science, what science and research tells us, but we shouldn't compare ourselves to others so much, maybe. Okay, it's a fine line. That's what she said. Good way to say it, Dan. Did you find that the parents were often the last to know? She said the parent I interviewed did not have a child who was delayed or had a problem. My sister did watch one of my nieces for a while because some of the things that she did got my sister wondering if maybe there was something there. Okay, that's interesting. Did you get a sense that parents were uncomfortable or had a sense of denial or shame? She said, I didn't have a chance to see this with the interview, but I have seen many parents of children who have special needs because I worked at a preschool, on a bus, and at a high school with special needs children and have had different encounters with the parents. I've seen both sides of this question, where the parent was in denial about the problems their child had, and also where the parent has accepted it for what it is and has done everything possible to help their child do their best and love them the same as they do with their other children who don't have special needs. So it doesn't seem like those parents had any sense of denial or shame, um, and had a plan for dealing with it. So that's good. Great job, Andy. Okay, now I'm going to move on to Kaya's material. So she said, I interviewed someone who has a child that is 9 years old. He's a very active little boy and the cutest boy in the world. He's the second youngest child, and his mother began noticing that there were issues with his speech. He didn't ever speak, but would only sing. And when he was 4 years old and still didn't speak in full sentences, they took him to get tested to see if he could be in a specialized preschool. The woman that was testing him mentioned to the parents that there might be more issues than just his speech, and that's when they tested him for seizures and for autism. He was diagnosed with seizures and with slight autism, but he's high functioning, it sounds like. However, you do have to make sure that when you talk to him, you're like right in his face looking at him if you want him to hear you and understand what you want him to understand. Okay, and then she said, when asked about the differences in development, the interviewee said, talking, he didn't talk, he would sing. He didn't say any sentences until he was 4, and he played on the floor a lot and climbed. He always made sound effects when he moved, and he did walk fine. Teething, he handles pain really well. His sensory is a little bit slow. He might not recognize if he has hurt himself. He just wouldn't notice if he'd been hurt. The only differences his mother noticed about potty training is that he would go behind the couch and go to the bathroom instead of going to the actual bathroom, which is not abnormal. I know I had some siblings that did that too. He was also a little slower at walking because, like was mentioned before, he would stay on the floor and didn't show interest in walking. He went to speech therapy when he was age 4 through 2nd grade for about 3 years, and that made a dramatic difference in his speech. When asked about the challenges his family faces, the interviewee responded, I didn't know if he was going to be okay. I didn't know if he had to be medicated for the future. We don't know if he will continue to have focus issues. We would rather deal with his quirks than medicate him because he didn't act like himself when he was medicated. Will he get married? Will he have problems? He is still in grade school, so we don't know if he will be behind all his life. She also mentioned that he needs a constant schedule, like a routine. And that's pretty common for autistic kids. Okay, so it sounds like this family has definitely been trying to work on helping him, and they have accepted that he has issues, but they are willing to face them head on instead of just like being overwhelmed by them or ignoring them. And it sounds like she's, determined to help him, but she doesn't really know what his life will be like. And I think that's pretty normal for kids or for parents with kids with special needs, because you never know what a child's going to be exactly like when they grow up, especially if they have a special need that is a little bit unpredictable, because you don't know how that will change as he grows up or how that will affect his ultimate, like, overall development. Okay, so that was Kaya Kid's interview. And So I think we were supposed to answer one more question. I did not bring it up, so I'm going to do that right now. It's just a little bit awkward having a meeting on my own, but since I was able to, I was like, I want to turn this in anyway, even if no one was able to come. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm just talking to myself. Okay, so I'm loading up the question. I believe it had something to do with development and what did you learn about it? But I don't remember the exact wording and the terms that were used. It's just loading pretty slowly. Okay, here we go. The question is, what can you learn from this experience about normative variation, maturational delay, transient disorders, or persistent impairments? Did you see any themes or patterns occurring in your discussion and findings about your respective interviews? Well, my interview was about a child with ADHD, and he has some maturational delay. He plays with children that are younger than him, and he has some social skills, some lacking social skills. For his ADHD, I would say that is a normative variation for his ADHD from his development. But the rest of his siblings were pretty like baseline normal, like all very similar. He does have persistent impairments that will have to be worked on. He takes medication for his ADHD, but it doesn't fix everything. So he will continue to have to learn certain things that other kids would not really have to learn and would kind of pick up. But he just doesn't quite pick those up. So he'll have to learn those, and that's a persistent impairment. So Andy didn't have a child in her interview family that was abnormal, so for her, those children seemed all pretty normal, and the only variation, which was not an abnormal variation, was normal, was that the youngest child was a little bit slower. And I don't think I think that's pretty normal, because that also happened in my family, because there were so many people to like help and do things for the youngest that they didn't feel like they needed to do much. They didn't feel the same, desire to be independent that other kids sometimes feel. Okay. So for Kaya's, she interviewed an autistic kid, so I would say that is quite a variation. And there is probably some variation between the other siblings. And I'm sure that she noticed that his behavior was different as he started to grow. So it says when he was 4, he wasn't really talking much. He was singing, not talking. So that's quite a variation, and also a maturational delay, I would think. And that is a persistent impairment. And did you see any themes or patterns occurring? I would think that every family has a little bit of normal variation, and every child especially based on their family situation, it's going to be a little bit different because your family situation changes with each new child that's different. Um, but the kids with issues like ADHD or autism did have some maturational delays, it seems like, and would probably be dealing with this impairment for the rest of their life. So that was a pattern in the discussion. Okay, so it says in the final 2 minutes of the session, have a group member summarize the discussion and any consensus that was reached. So I'm the only group member, so I guess I'll summarize myself what I said. So I talked about my interview, which was with my aunt, and I talked about her son, Joe, who has ADHD and has grown up and had trouble in school and has trouble with friends and getting along with people socially. And then I talked about Andy Angman's interview, where she talked about her sister's family and their variations with their children. And then I talked about Kai Kidd's interview with a family that has an autistic child and what they talked about in their interview. And then I went over the final question about normative variation and those other important terms that we learned about this lesson, and the themes and patterns that came up in the discussion. And that is a summary of what I talked about. And so now I think that's pretty much it. I will end this group meeting and post it on the discussion board, and hopefully next week we can plan ahead better and all be able to meet together instead of having a one-person group. Okay, so thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed my rambling, and that is it for today.